Ready? Ready or not? Ready or not, here we go. Shema Yisrael. I need a wrench. Something to tighten that up. All right, you ready? Gail, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, then sit down, please. Thank you very much. I said Gail. Oh, my goodness. Now, we had last week at our Trail Life boys group, we had maybe 11. And the week before, we had 21. And it's like that. It's up and down sometimes. Depends on the weather, depends on ball games and other things that they have going on. And anyway, as we were beginning, there were like 8 boys in the room, and another boy came in the back, and he looked around, and what do you imagine his words were? Where is everybody? Right? So I'm not going to do that tonight, because you are everybody tonight. And I thought maybe I made everybody mad last week, but it seems like the more I go down that direction, the less people are mad. So it just is what it is. And we're going to do, tonight, we're going to do a little, we're going to look back at what we looked at last week. I guess sometimes when you have been reading and praying and digging and doing a lot of unlearning has to do with, just things that we learned in our religious background growing up. Christianese, all of that, and Christian theology, and some of those things that we said, well, that's just the way it is, because that's what, thus and so told me. And then we began reading the Bible. And that's where things begin to get rough, isn't it? Okay, do you realize that most people that are religious or Christians, that the vast majority of them do not read their Bible? They read little snippets here and there. They may get a message on a Sunday morning that has a Bible verse, or maybe 5, one for each little point or something like that. But by and large, it's not a let's dig in and really learn and figure out what this is all about. And thus, we end up with 40,000 denominations in the world. Anyway, let's begin by declaring these words again out loud. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Shema Yisrael, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Hear, Israel, Yehovah our God, Yehovah is one, and we will love Yehovah our God with all our heart, all our being, and all our resources. Amen. Amen. This is where we're going to go tonight. Well, it worked a minute ago. Here we go. Is there anybody up there? Something's going on, and I don't know what it is, but I got to have it. There's a new battery in it. The switch is on. Okay, I don't know what you did, but thanks. This is where we're going, and in a way, this is, all of Matthew is like one long message, and it's been a couple years long, but I wonder how long it took the writer, Matthew, to write it, collect all of those ideas together and figure out where they go. Because, as you know, it isn't a biography, it's a gospel. And he wrote it for a reason. He wrote it to communicate the good news about the kingdom of Yehovah and Yeshua to Jews. And Jews that lived in the day of Yeshua, or right after. All right? And we're going to pick it up right where we left off last week with these words. But Yeshua, again, crying out in a loud voice, yielded up his spirit. In John's gospel, he gives his words when he yielded up his spirit, and his words are traditionally known as, "It is finished." Okay? Another way you could look at that is, "It is done." It has been done. Now, there are like 800 messages on the last words of Jesus, all right? And "it is finished" has all of these ideas with it. But I want to suggest something that maybe hasn't entered your mind yet. Do you remember reading Psalm 22 and why we read that? Okay? Yeshua was on the cross, and he cried out, my God, why have you abandoned me? Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" And everybody thinks that means that God abandoned Jesus. That is not what that means. What that means is turn and read Psalm 22. Remember? Because that's the beginning words of it. Guess what the ending words are to Psalm 22? For the kingdom. Remember what the cross is all about? The kingdom. The kingdom belongs to Adonai, and he rules over the nations. And they will come and declare his righteousness to a people yet to be born, because he has done it. In other words, Yeshua is crying out, "I have done it." Done what? Is the question. Now, last week, we looked at a lot of the meaning of the cross. That, as we learn, goes way beyond the idea that Jesus died on the cross to bring me forgiveness. And we learned that that's not actually true. You already had forgiveness. In our reading today, those of you that are reading along in the Bible with us, one of our things that we read was Psalm 103. It's beautiful. I get moved whenever I read that. "Bless Yehovah, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless Yehovah, O my soul, and forget not all of his benefits." And then he makes a list of benefits, and one of them right in there is, "Who forgives all your sins." Who wrote that? David. When did David write that? Wasn't it like 1,000 years almost before Yeshua ever died on the cross? Then how is it that David and others could know we are forgiven if he hadn't died on the cross yet? And what we learned was this, okay? That the cross is a sign of something that already happened. That is the atonement before the foundations of the world. Okay? We read about that in Revelation. We read about that in Peter's letter. And I know that that isn't easy to get your head around, and that's all right. There's a lot in the Bible that isn't easy to get your head around. But I want you to not as much to just get your head around it. I want to get your heart around it, to realize how good God is. That before you and I were even made, before human beings were even created, He already had the way for us to be forgiven. So Adam and Abraham and Joseph and Jacob and Moses and David and Gideon and everybody has always been forgiven by the blood of the Lamb that was slain before the foundation of the world. Okay? Give me a nod or a thumbs up or something. All right. Now, this is what it means. All right? This is not all that it means, but here's some things that means. That the atonement, that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, that means Messiah's sacrifice was already in place when Adam sinned. Okay? Secondly, it means that Messiah's death dealt with intentional sin. By His death, I don't only mean death on the cross. I mean the Lamb being slain before the foundation. Some of you are looking at me like, what do you mean intentional sin? Okay, I'm going to say this again. All of the sacrifices that were made in Leviticus for sin were all for unintentional sin. Whoopses is what they are. Whoops. I mean, I did something wrong and I didn't even know it. It's all right. There's a sacrifice for that. But you know what? I think I'm going to lie to my neighbor, because my neighbor bugs me, and my neighbor is going to come over and ask if I have an extra shovel because it's snowing. And I'm going to look at my neighbor. I'm going to say, no, I don't have one. When I know I have one in the garage, there's no sacrifice for that in the sacrificial system. Did you know that? Okay? So how in the world would I get forgiven if there's no animal sacrifice for intentional sin? Two things. Number one is I need to get out of my rebellion and repent. But secondly, I need to remember that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world in order to deal with my pesha. Okay? All right. It also means there is no division between law and grace. There's no Old Testament is law, New Testament is grace. No, it's all grace. Okay? And law means Torah. Torah is just His instructions. Okay? It also means that the Torah is simply what tells me how to live once I have been made right by the Lamb being slain from the foundation of the world. Okay? You guys all right with that? All right. Now, there's more. All right? The cross is a physical sign of, and I did not mention this last week, it is a physical sign of the renewal or cutting of the new, in quotation marks, covenant with Israel. Okay? Are you guys here? Do you remember in Jeremiah? I don't have it up there, but it's memorized. The words of Jeremiah, behold, I will make a new / renewed, meaning altogether, I will repair, okay, the covenant with Israel and Judah. So the new covenant that everybody is like, I mean, there's churches named New Covenant. And I want to ask them, who is the new covenant with? And you know what their answer is going to be? Well, it's with the Gentiles. No, it isn't. It's with Judah and Israel. Okay? When Yeshua is shedding his blood, he is cutting that covenant. You guys all right? Okay. I can stop early if you want me to not go on. Okay. It also was a sign of Yeshua's kingship. Remember? And they actually, ironically, they actually had a sign over him that says Yeshua, King of the Jews. Little did he know he was King of the world. All right? It was a sign of Yeshua's power over the world's pagan systems of control, which used fear of death. That's what the cross was. And you remember the connection that Yeshua made with the pole in the wilderness with the snake on it, which represented Egypt, Pharaoh and Egypt. And he said, if I'm lifted up, I'm going to be lifted up like that. Okay? Just as the snake was on that pole, the symbol of Rome and their power was the cross. Okay? It also is a sign of the ultimate Passover, which was not a sacrifice. Okay? It was a death, but the blood of the lamb was what was used to put over the door so that the angel of death or death would pass over me, which means Passover is ultimately not about death, but about life. So on the cross, Yeshua brought the death of death, the end of it. All right? In the last two, he brought the beginning of the cleansing of creation from the defilement of death through his high priest status. Is this too many words at once? You're right? Sam, you're saying yes? It's too many words at once. Okay. Last, the cross is a sign of the beginning of the redemption of all creation. Not just you, the universe. Okay? All of this is going on when Yeshua, he says it is done. Okay, that's from that verse, Yeshua, crying out in a loud voice, yielded up his spirit. So you want to see what happens next? Next, Matthew says this in the complete Jewish Bible. At that moment, the parochet in the temple was ripped in two from top to bottom, and there was an earthquake with rocks splitting apart. That doesn't mean that's the order of what happened. It happened all at once. There was an earthquake, and the whatever that word means, which in a lot of your English Bibles is veil, the veil in the temple was ripped from top to bottom. Okay, here we go. Are you ready to get rid of another cow? Sorry, but let's really dig into this, all right? Because I've heard all my life, you've heard all your life, there was a veil in the temple separating the Holy of Holies from everybody else. And when Yeshua died to bring you forgiveness of sins, that veil was open so everyone could go in to the Holy of Holies. That's what you've learned, all right? Tonight we're going to learn something a little different, all right? And here is why. The word in the complete Jewish Bible is actually not the right word. Every now and then, Dr. Stern makes a translation that I don't agree with. Okay? He's a lot smarter than me. He's gone into glory now, but his work and his complete Jewish Bible is the one that I use. All right? It's that good. But in this instance, all right, there's a little theological infiltration into his translation of the word. The word is veil or curtain. It's one of those. The paraket was a veil, the veil that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place. But in reality, in the temple, just like in the tabernacle and in Herod's temple, there were two chambers. Both of them had curtains, and the larger and more visible one was not the one that separated the Holy of Holies from the other chamber, but the one that separated the other chamber from the rest of the courtyard. All right? I think I have some pictures up there. Okay, so this is the idea of Herod's temple, and it's just like Solomon's temple and the tabernacle. It's built on the idea of you enter in from the east. As you're entering in, you have all of these courts. When you enter into the court of Israel, there's an altar right there, which is where they burned the animals. It was like a giant grill, actually, all right, like a literally giant barbecue grill. We used to have these barbecues in Florida. Every year we had one, and we made a grill that was as big as this black mat up there, okay? And everybody brought their mullet. Mullet is a fish that only native Floridians eat. Because when anybody else hears you eat mullet, they're like, ooh, you guys eat mullet? Mullet is delicious. When we just went to Florida, I was waiting on the day that I could go drive to the little fishing place and get my mullet. But the grill was ginormous, and the altar was ginormous, and there was a laver, which is like a mikvah, in order to wash. But then you entered into what was known as the holy place. What was in there? The menorah, okay? The table where the bread was, okay, representing what? Well, I am your daily bread. I am the bread of life, okay? And there was an incense altar that represents prayers, okay? Now, right there at the entrance to the holy place was a giant veil. The veil hung on pillars known as lintels, okay? Then, as you entered in the holy place, there's one more entrance and one more veil right there that goes into the most holy place, otherwise known as the Holy of Holies. In that, only one person was allowed to enter. Who was it? The high priest. Who could enter into the other, the holy place? Priests in general. But into the Holy of Holies, only the high priest entered, and only one day a year. What day? Yom Kippur. Right? Okay. So remember all of that. Now, in Yeshua's day, Herod's temple was literally one of the wonders of the world. Okay? People traveled from all over to Israel in order to witness Herod's temple. And this veil that was visible from the outside, there it is, a rendition of it right there. This veil that was visible from the outside, i.e., where the Roman soldiers would have been at the cross, they would have been able to look at this veil, the outer veil of this temple. The outer veil was approximately 8 stories high. It was 4 feet thick and was visible from miles away. The weight of it would have been measured in tons. Okay? In some of the early Jewish writings of the day, I read that it took 300 men to get that curtain up where it needed to be. So when the veil or the curtain ripped, it was seen by the Roman soldiers around the cross. Okay? We're going to read about that in a few verses later, and it gets a little confusing in this section of Matthew, and the reason is he does a little bit of skipping after the resurrection and then back to what's going on, okay? And this is an example. So here it is in Matthew. When the Roman officer and those who were with him, meaning Yeshua, when they who were keeping watch over Yeshua, saw the earthquake and what was happening, they were awestruck and said, "He really was the Son of God." Now, there was no way that the soldiers or anybody else who was near Yeshua would have seen or known the condition of the curtain that was covering the Holy of Holies, because it was way back inside this building. Okay? Something else was going on. Now, in one of the Hebrew Gospels of Matthew, you guys are right, you know what I'm talking about, okay? That Matthew was originally written in Hebrew, and some of those manuscripts and versions of Hebrew have been handed down and found. One of them is known as the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia. Do you know where that is? It's a region in Spain, which is where Jews, when they fled, when the temple went down in 70 AD, there were many Jews that had listened to Yeshua's words. Remember in Matthew? He said, when you see armies coming in and there's earthquakes and all of these things that are happening, you guys need to get out. So a bunch of them got out and they fled into the region of Spain known as Catalonia, and they would have brought the Hebrew Gospels with them. This verse that we read a couple minutes ago from the Hebrew Gospels of Catalonia reads this: "And here the temple was broken on both sides, up and down, and the earth quaked, and the stones split in the middle." There's not a word in there about a veil or a curtain. That doesn't mean that the veil or the curtain was not rent. It simply means in the Hebrew version, what it's focused on are the rocks, the stones, even those that would have held up the pillars. All right? Now, Miles Jones, some of you guys know him in his book, Sons of Zion, Sons of Greece. He wrote about this, and this is what he wrote. He said, "The earthquake would account for the breaking of the large lintel stone over the entrance of the inner temple. The stones split in the middle. Note that the damage would also have torn the veil hanging beneath the lintel." Okay? Now, there's another ancient writing known as the Gospel of the Nazarenes. Very interesting. In the Gospel of the Nazarenes, there's more written about this, but there's something else as well. All right? That at the time of Messiah's death, the lintel of the temple of immense size had split. Josephus says the same, that the lintel split, and adds that overhead awful voices were heard which said, "Let us depart from this abode." What in the world is that about? Okay? As the earthquake is going on and the rock is splitting and the veil is ripping, there are voices that were heard basically saying this: "Let's get out of here." Now, in 2018, we had a little earthquake in Alaska. You guys remember that? And I was with Kit and Art and Janice and Robert and some others. I don't remember if Gene, if you were in the room, you weren't in the room. My office, the office is right behind this, which means that during the week when kids are in here playing basketball, I hear everything. And we were sitting in that office, and the earthquake began, and I thought it was the kids from PNA in the rooms up above the office running, because every morning that happens. So every morning you think there's an earthquake. So I was like, all right, kids are running. And then it was obvious, no, this is more than that. And I will admit, two of us ran out of the building. Okay? Right, Kit? Kit and I, we were out the door, all right? All the rest just sat there and watched the bookcases come down. And, you know, you've heard you're not supposed to run out the door in an earthquake. Well, I ran out the door. Why? Same reason these guys did. There was an earthquake going on, and they're going, "Let's get out of here." I wanted to watch the trees move because I heard about it, and I wanted to see if there were any waves in the ground because I'd heard about that, you know. These people, they wanted to get out of there. Who were they and what was going on, okay? An earthquake like this that would damage the lintel and damage the rocks would have damaged other rooms and buildings in the temple, including what was known as the Chamber of Hewn Stones. It sounds like we're on an Indiana Jones investigation, doesn't it? Well, in a way, we are. Now, where the Sanhedrin... Okay, here we go again. Click. What's going on with my clicker? Oh, I put a new one in. All right, anyway. Where they met was known, where the Sanhedrin met was known as the Chamber of Hewn Stones. All right? They would have met in that room at their last meeting as they led Yeshua over to Pilate. Their last meeting would have been in that room, the Chamber of Hewn Stones. Now, this is something interesting that we read in the Talmud. Talmud is written oral law and history. That's Jewish history. But check this out, okay? You guys are like your Indiana Jones tonight. So put your Indy hats on and get your whip ready. Okay? 40 years before the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. Stop. When would that have been? Okay? 70s when the destruction was. So go back about 40 years, and where are you? 30-ish. What happened in 30-ish? The crucifixion and this earthquake. Very interesting that even in the Talmud, you read that the Sanhedrin was removed from the Chamber of Hewn Stones in the temple. and they convened in the marketplace. In other words, their office and meeting room where they had met in order to bring the charges of blasphemy against Yeshua were destroyed at the cross. There's a lot more going on, all right? That's in the Talmud. Now, I mentioned a book last week by Ernest Martin, okay? There's more than one book that he has written. This is from a book known The Secret of Golgotha. And this is what he writes. Okay, oh, by the way, there it would be. So here's that entrance. We're looking at it from the other side right now. There's the entrance where the ginormous veil would be and the lintel. There's the Holy of Holies way in the back. This is where the room was. It's a large, huge room like this or larger, known as the chamber of hewn stone where they can no longer meet. Well, this is what Ernest Martin wrote, all right? He wrote, the judgment made by the official Sanhedrin against Jesus within the chamber of hewn stones was the last judgment ever given by the official Sanhedrin in their majestic chambers within the temple. Remember what the cross is about? The cross is about power. And it's about the taking down of Roman power and Jewish religious authority, Sanhedrin power as well. Okay, now we all know that most of our Christian traditions said it was the inner veil that was ripped, giving us all direct access to the Holy of Holies. But remember, that inner chamber was reserved for one. And by the way, in Herod's day, what was in that chamber? It was empty. There's nothing in there. The ark was not there. The ark was where they met Jehovah, but the ark had been gone since the days of Jeremiah. And Jeremiah, he said the ark is gone and it's not going to be coming back. So, just keep that in mind. All right? Okay, so we have that going on. The place where all priests were allowed was the outer chamber. Okay? The inner one was for the high priest. Now, this is interesting. Peter, in his letter, quoting from Exodus and Deuteronomy, writes this about you and me and every other person who trusts in Yeshua and follows his ways from the days of these events. This is what he wrote. You yourselves, as living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be what? Kohanim. What does that mean? Priests set apart for God to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to Him through Yeshua the Messiah. And then he goes on, for you are a chosen people, the king's priests, a holy nation, a people for God to possess. Okay? Now, remember, all of this system of the Levites and the tabernacle and the offerings and the sacrifices, all of it was like shadows of the heavenly. Remember? Okay? So you have Levites, and now you have us. Are you following me? So regarding that inner chamber, this is what I believe Yeshua was talking about in John, where he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through or by me. I always wondered, like, is he blocking the way? No, he's not blocking the way. Why? Well, we read this in Hebrews. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through to the highest heaven, Yeshua, the Son of God, let us hold firmly on what we acknowledge as true. Yeshua is the high priest. We are the rest of the priests. Yeshua is our mediary, if you will, our intermediary between us and Jehovah that no man has ever seen. He is our great high priest. So I really like what Tom Bradford wrote about this. Okay, it's so that you know I'm not the only one who has these ideas. Okay, we're not the only one. Tom Bradford wrote this, and I think he's right on. If as believers we, as a result of Yeshua's death, are allowed into the Holy of Holies, then we don't become mere priests. We become high priests. However, Yeshua is our spiritual high priest, and there can only ever be one. Bottom line, it was not the inner veil that tore. It was not the Holy of Holies that became symbolically open to believers. Rather, it was the outer veil that tore, which did symbolically invite believers into it as servants, priests of God in His kingdom. Now, you can do whatever you want with that. You don't have to believe it in order to be a believer. You don't have to believe what I'm bringing you, the information that I'm bringing you. I'm doing the best that I can do to Indiana Jones it and bring up things that are in the Gospels that maybe you haven't heard because they've been hidden for thousands of years by a bunch of Christian theology. Okay? Something else that I thought was interesting, that even if the Holy of Holies is open, okay, it might not be a symbol that you can go in. It might be a symbol that God went out. Because now the earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof. Heaven is His throne, earth is His footstool. All right? So everything's not all down into this little place, but now, because of Yeshua, it's blasted out to the ends of the earth. Okay? That's free, not even in my notes. Okay, do you want to go on or do you want to wait till next week? 5 more minutes-ish, or more. Okay, next, also, here we go. The graves were opened, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. And after Yeshua rose, they came out of their graves and went into the holy city, where many people saw them. When I read that, and I used to read that, I would read it and go, huh. And then I'd read on. It's like, what do you do with that? I mean, what are you going to do with that kind of information? Is there any other evidence? Are there any other writings about it? And, no, not really. Only Matthew. And he sticks it in there. Okay? It's like the resurrection hasn't happened yet, but he's letting you know that after the resurrection, this is something that happened. A bunch of believers who were in the earth, so they're in a tomb. Think of a tomb as something in the earth. Okay? So they're in a tomb, they're in the earth, and they go up out of the earth. All right? So what in the world is going on? All right. Part of it has to do, I believe, with our timeline. Now, in the last chapter, 2 chapters of Matthew, Matthew goes back and forth between the day of his death, which would have been Passover. Yes? Boom, there it is. Wednesday. The next day is the first day of unleavened bread. The next day is a preparation day for the weekly Shabbat, and Yeshua would have raised probably at the end of Saturday, not Sunday, at the end of the weekly Shabbat. And this is very interesting, because right at the end of that weekly Shabbat, since it was the week of Passover, it's also going to be the week of something known as first fruits. And what happened on that day is priests went out and they collected barley. Okay? Whatever is the first fruits of the barley. Where does barley come up from? The ground. They collected it, and that night, the night that Yeshua would have raised from the dead on the evening of the evening, which is the end of that Shabbat, on that night the high priest is literally in the temple gathering it all together and waiting until morning, because he had like 10 bundles that he would, on the morning, he would wave them as the first fruits offering, and they did that every year for hundreds of years. Okay, now, very interesting, Paul writes about, there's a kind of an artist rendition of a high priest waving the barley, waving the first fruits in the air. This is what Rabbi Paul wrote about Yeshua. The fact is that the Messiah has been raised from the dead, the what? First fruits of all who died. The best explanation that I've read from who these holy people were that raised out of the grave, all right, after the resurrection, they came out of the graves, was written by Michael Rood in the chronological Gospels. And this is what he says: the resurrection of these saints is part of the fulfillment of the prophetic shadow pictures embedded in the day of first fruits. This is when the saints in the graves arose in the sight of thousands who were participating in the harvest of Ha-Bikurim. In other words, they're all out there and they're watching the high priest wave this first fruits. Yeshua is alive and others coming out of the ground. That's the beginning of the first fruits. Isn't that amazing? Now, it says there were many women there looking on from a distance. They had followed Yeshua from Galilee, helping him. Among them were Miriam from Magdala, Miriam, the mother of Jacob and Joseph. I might, in parentheses, add the mother of Yeshua. Okay? Probably. And the mother of Zebedee, Zechariah's sons, James and John. All right? And towards evening, there came a wealthy man from Ramathaim named Joseph, who was himself a Talmud, a disciple of Yeshua. He approached Pilate and asked for Yeshua's body, and Pilate ordered it to be given to him. By the way, this was not any, average, everyday Joseph. This man was rich. Okay? Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own tomb, which had recently been cut out of the rock. After rolling a large stone in front of the entrance to the tomb, he went away. Miriam of Magdala and the other Miriam stayed there, sitting opposite the grave. Okay? Now, you learn from the other Gospels that this guy, Joseph of Ramathaim, otherwise known as Joseph of Arimathea, was a member of the Sanhedrin who had not voted to execute Yeshua and was secretly one of his followers. So don't get the idea that all of the religious leaders were evil. They weren't, all of them. As a matter of fact, in the book of Acts, we learned that many Pharisees were following Yeshua. Okay? Now, in the day, tombs usually had more than one burial place. Okay? So like this is an example of a tomb, and there's all of these little chambers that are in it. And Yeshua would have been in one of those. What happened, it's kind of interesting. What happened is they would bury you in there, and you'd be there about a year till you were like nothing but bones. And then they would come in and get your bones and put them in a bone box, and then bring the bone box and bury it somewhere else, so that the tomb would be able to be used again. Isn't that interesting? All right? So, yeah, I think that's interesting. Now, it says the next day, after the preparation, okay, the head Kohanim and the Pharisees went together to Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember that the deceiver said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will be raised.' Therefore, order that the grave be made secure till the 3rd day. Otherwise, the Talmudim may come, steal him away, and say to the people, 'He was raised from the dead,' and the last deception will be worse than the first." The 3rd day after his death would have been the beginning day of cleansing for those who handled his body, which is why they arrived on Sunday morning, okay, which was after the Shabbat. Now, those of you that have been in Torah class, you know there's something about the 3rd day. And that in the Bible there are these patterns that are established. And this one is rather amazing. All right? And we're almost done, so don't worry. Okay. Look at this. On the 3rd day, God separated the land and the sea, and the earth brought forth vegetation, which would have been the first fruits. Okay? On the 3rd day, Abraham took his beloved son Isaac up the mountain and saw Mount Moriah, and said to his servants, "We will worship and then we will return." Okay? On the 3rd day, Joseph released his brothers from prison in Egypt. And on the 3rd day, Yehovah spoke the 10 words from the mountain. Really, in Exodus, as you're reading about it, Yehovah says, "Get ready, tell them to be ready for the 3rd day." And that's when they heard the voices. It was on the 3rd day that the Israelites crossed Jordan to enter in and possess the land. It was on the 3rd day that Hezekiah was healed from his disease. It was on the 3rd day that Jonah was expelled from the belly of the fish. By the way, when Yeshua was talking about the sign of Jonah, 3 days, 3 nights, on the 3rd day, out he comes. And it was on the 3rd day that Esther entered the palace of the Persian king in order to stop the plot of Haman on the 3rd day. And on the 3rd day, Yeshua rose from the grave. So, finally, Pilate, this will finish out that chapter in Matthew. Pilate is said to them, "You may have your guard. Go and make the grave as secure as you know how." So they went and made the grave secure or by sealing the stone and putting the guard on watch. So we'll pick it up there next week. Does anybody have any questions or revelations?
I have two questions. The first one is a rhetorical question. If the Pharisees remembered that he said he would rise from the dead on the third day, how come the Talmudim did not remember? Kind of a rhetorical question. I don't know whether you know the answer to that, but I got to thinking, that occurred to me. But my other question is, so what did the Kohen Gadol do in the most holy place on Yom Kippur if the room was empty? What did Zechariah do at the beginning of Matthew when he walked in with the blood of the scapegoat? Did he just sprinkle it on the floor? What
He
did
must
he do?
have. He must have. That's all I know. Yeah. He must have. He must have done that. Kind of like going through the motions in a way. And there was nothing wrong with that. That's what he needed to be doing because he was the high priest and the system was up and running. And so he went in to do that.
Even though there was no caporet to put
Good
it on.
question. Yeah, that's right. Nowhere to put it on. And the other thing is that one, the goat that the blood went in there was for the cleansing of him and the temple. It wasn't for the people. The people got the other goat that went out into the wilderness and they pushed it off. So, very interesting. Anything else? You guys aren't throwing any tomatoes or anything. If you did now, they would be frozen tomatoes. But, all right, well, we'll keep going next week. And if you have any questions, I'm right here. And you know my email. You're welcome to ask anything. I may be right. I may be wrong. I don't know. But to me, this is all fascinating. Just fascinating. Okay? All right, let's stand together. And if you're going to hit your button, and your button makes noise, like doodleep, doodleep, do it now before I pray. Go ahead, hit your button. Start your vehicles. Yehovah, it is amazing what you have done for us and for all of your creation. We are aware more than ever of your love, your chesed, your loyalty to us and your universe. And that the things that we read about, things that we've learned about, things that we've maybe even taken for granted all of our lives, like Jesus dying on the cross, that there's so much more there, so much more that you are doing in the world, and that you are so amazingly concerned with details, little details. They're beautiful, they're gorgeous, and we thank you, for we are one of your details, aren't we? Yehovah now will bless you and keep you. Yehovah will make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. Yehovah will look you in the eyes and give you his shalom. Yivarechecha Yehovah ve'yishmerecha Yair Yehovah panav elecha v'yikrunecha Yisa Yehovah panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Shabbat shalom. Go home and read your Bibles and have a great Shabbat.